Welcome, everyone, to Faith in Later Life and our session on practical pastoral care among older people. I'm Alex Huggins, and I have the privilege of leading this lovely UK-wide charity where our mission is to help churches reach older people with the good news, disciple them as lifelong believers, and to mobilize them in God's irrevocable call to be disciple makers. We have lots of things come up throughout the year. We hear from our church champions when we're on conference stands, in our emails, on our WhatsApp, and in all sorts of different places. And that's where we get to find out what some of the questions that you are asking yourselves and in your churches are at this time. And one of those areas of questions seems to be around how can we practically deliver pastoral care among our older people? And so I'm absolutely thrilled that we have got our own ambassador, Keith Brown, to come and lead us in this session today. Keith comes with a vast amount of experience, and you can find out more about him on our website, of course. But I won't go into all of that. Perhaps Keith would like to introduce himself a little more than I have. But thank you, Keith, so much for joining us for this session today. You're going to talk for about 35, 40 minutes, or maybe a little less, and then we're going to have some Q&A time. And so if you have any questions, everybody, do pop them in the chat. And we're hoping that lots of your questions will be answered as Keith speaks. But for any that aren't, do please put them in the chat, and we will host a bit of a conversation more towards the end to try and get some of those answered as well. Keith, welcome. Over to you.
Thank you, Alex. Folks, I just want to say right from the outset that I am absolutely thrilled and delighted to be with you all to share some of my journey in this space of as a government advisor in social care, but also as a man of faith, as a Christian. I just want to first of all say thank you for all that you do in your churches, in your communities, particularly in this area of supporting and valuing older people. Some of you might have heard me speak before, just a little bit. You know, I lead the national research into fraud and scams. I'm a chair of a couple of adult safeguarding boards. I've been the chair of the NHS National Safeguarding Board as well. And I'm pretty well known in the field of end-of-life care and mental capacity as an advisor for the government. But I want to take that and use some of the material that's in the little book that you can download from the Faith in Later Life website on guidance for the Christian faith organisations in the support and value of older people, and go through and update some of my thoughts and reflections on that. First of all, I want to just say this, though. Older people matter. They matter to God. And a church that's predominantly made up of older people is not a failing church. It's a church that's ministering to that generation. And I think sometimes we should be encouraged by that and wanting to say, wow, here is a church that's predominantly full of older people, and that's their focus. It's not a weak church or a failing church. It's just a church with older people. But I also want to remind us all that older people are usually connected via families. And family members and churches full of young people, they often have, as young people, older relatives and older friends. And so the advice and the comments I'm going to be talking about today, and the advice I'll be giving, isn't just for churches working with older people. They're for anybody in church. Church has family, from the youngest to the oldest, and families are interconnected. And some churches might think, actually, a ministry of older people is not really our focus. But trust me, when it's your relative, your grandparent, your mum or dad that's suffering and struggling with how do I navigate through the care system, how do I manage end of life, how do I deal with these problems, they want support and advice as well. So many of the things we'll be talking about today, in a sense, will be targeted towards older people. But I just want to say right at the beginning, it's for church. So be bold and try and remember that and make sure that all of us in all of our churches can think through how we can best support, value, and care for the older members of our society. I'm going to try and update you a little bit today about fraud and scams. It's the largest crime now in the country. 40% of all crime in Britain is now a fraud or a scam. And the majority of that crime is targeted towards older people. It's usually massively underreported because these people are often too embarrassed to even report the crime, but it is huge. Do you know, in 1997, there were an average of 8 armed robberies per week of banks in London. 8 armed robberies per week of banks in London alone. 40 odd across the country. There are now no armed robberies of banks because banks don't have money in them. And that's why criminals are turning to fraud and scams. I want to talk a little bit about lasting powers of attorney, advance decisions to refuse treatment, particularly in the light of the recent work around the assisted dying bill. I want to talk to you specifically about helping people with bank accounts for friends and families. I want to talk about dementia and just offer some other personal and practical advice for those of you providing pastoral support and care to older people. But I'd like, first of all, to show you a short 12-minute animated podcast. This is freely available. I'm hoping it will be on the Faith in Later Life website. If it's not, you can download it from my website, profkeith.com, along with all the other materials I'll talk about today. It's freely available. This podcast is actually produced for adult safeguarding boards and for the NHS as national guidance for doctors, nurses, and social workers. But it's just as relevant for you. And it tells you something about my own story with my own mother. Rachel, over to you. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Professor Keith Brown, and I'm the chair of the Worcestershire Safeguarding Adults Board. I have many other hats. I was a professor of social work for many years, and I've worked in the area of vulnerability and safeguarding. And today in this animated podcast, I want to talk to you about something called executive function. Quite an interesting term, that, isn't it? And quite difficult to always understand. Executive function is all about our ability to control ourselves, to organise ourselves, and to regulate our behaviour. But at times in our lives, our executive function isn't functioning well. There can be impairments. This can be caused by alcohol or drugs. It can be caused by brain injury. But one of the biggest causes is dementia. And today I'd like to talk to you about executive function and its impairment, particularly in the context of dementia. And I'm going to do this by telling you the story of my own mother and the way I cared for her in the later part of her life. I'd like to take you back many years, about 30 years ago actually, when my mum and dad were in their 50s. They went on a skiing holiday, and my dad was a very good skier and my mum wasn't quite such a good skier. So at the end of the day, my mother and father agreed to meet up at the top of the ski slopes, and my dad and mum would come back down on the chairlift together. On the descent, unfortunately, my father had a heart attack, and many people were looking at this elderly couple, a couple in their 50s, they were elderly to me at the time, coming down this chairlift with a lady hanging on to this man and cuddling a man, not realising that she was hanging on to him in his last breaths of life to make sure he didn't fall out because of the journey down. By the time my father got to the bottom, he had died. My mother was extremely lonely. One of the hardest things I've ever had to experience in my life was listening to my mother crying at night in desperate loneliness. She missed my dad so much. She was so lonely and she was so sad that she started to do things that many of us would think would be a bit crazy, a bit mad. She started having lots of boyfriends. As a son, it was very difficult coping with your mother, having different men moving in and out and all of her life going upside and down. And it was a very surreal situation. And my mother, you could argue, her executive functioning was just not functioning very well. It was not functioning very well because she was so lonely. She was in so much grief and so much pain. It wasn't dementia, but remember, executive functioning can be affected by simply grief and pain. And so technically, under the Mental Capacity Act situation, she was doing what we would describe now as making unwise decisions, having different men come and live with her and then throwing them out because they weren't good enough. And it is and was important to allow my mother to make these unwise decisions, even if I or others thought they were wrong. They were, after all, her decisions. Fortunately for my mum, after 2 or 3 years of this, she met another man called Graham, and they married. And my mother had a number of years in the end part of her life, happily married again for the second time. And I'm so grateful for both my mum and for Graham meeting up a second time and having those good years. But as time dragged on, Graham had a stroke and needed caring for, and then it became very clear that my mother was starting to have some cognitive impairment, some executive function difficulty. She was basically in the early stages of dementia. And the first time I ever really recognised this was on a visit to my mum. I used to pop round fairly frequently at this point because she was getting a little bit older. She was in the 70s, so she's not that chronologically that old, but it was clear that she wasn't functioning quite so well. My mother was a very proud northern lady, very glamorous. You'd have seen her as the belle of the ball. A lovely lady. I absolutely adored my mother and my father, but my mum was almost my hero because so much, and you can hear it in my voice now, so much of my drive comes from my mother. And one day I visited the house and there was bags, dustbin bags of clothing lining up the hallway. I thought, what's going on here? Is my mum having a big clear out for a charity shop? And I looked around and I could count 16 dustbin bags full of clothes. My mum had so many clothes, like most of us, that she couldn't fit them all in the bedroom, and some of them were stored in the spare bedroom, in the spare cupboards and drawers there. And I quickly, sneakily looked in the drawers, and the drawers were full of vitamins and vitamin supplements. And I couldn't understand. Every drawer I opened was full of vitamin supplements. And I started chatting to my mum, and I began to realise that in the space of just over a week, my mother had been sold over £3,500 worth of vitamins and vitamin supplements by a fairly well-known vitamin company over the telephone. I suspect there was enough vitamin D in my mum's house to have killed half the street. And she didn't know what to do with these vitamin supplements. And in her embarrassment, she hid them in her drawers, which had her clothes in, and was throwing her clothes away so that she could hide these vitamins. She literally didn't understand what she was doing at times when she had a high-pressure salesman trying to persuade her to buy unnecessary vitamins. This is what we mean by a lack of executive function. Somebody who, to all intents and purposes, was coping quite well. If you'd have met my mother, you wouldn't have thought she had dementia. She was surviving fine, she was happy, but she couldn't stop herself. She couldn't recognise that somebody trying to sell her tons and tons of vitamins was not right. And a few weeks and months later, I had a very, very profound moment with my mother. I was walking along the high street of the little village where she lives, through the shops, and my mother went to hold my hand. I don't think I've ever held my mother's hand in that way since I was a child. But when I was a child, my mother held my hand to protect me, to make sure I didn't fall into the road or get knocked over by a car or run off. My mother, without asking, without saying anything, literally reached out and held my hand as I walked along the high street with her. She was calling out for help. She knew that things were not quite right in her life. She knew she was not always coping, but she didn't understand. and she just needed help and support. And it was very, very profound that suddenly those parent-child relationships had reversed. And as the child, I was having to do a new level of caring for my own mother, something I was very happy to do, and very proud of the fact I was able to care for my mother in difficult times. But boy, oh boy, it was a shock. And I can still picture exactly where it was on that high street, a memory that will never ever go from me for the rest of my life. My mother wanting help, calling out for help, because she recognized that she wasn't always coping so well. Another example of her inability with executive functioning to manage cognitive control is this. I was in the kitchen with her one day and she got a packet of ham out of the fridge and she could still read the sell-by date. She was able to read and understand numbers and she could read a textbook to you, but she didn't understand what the numbers meant. She didn't understand anymore that a sell-by date meant that you should have eaten that ham before that date, before it went off, and potentially could cause you food poisoning. If my mother had eaten that ham or done some other, in inverted commas, crazy thing, some people can be quick to draw the conclusion that that's self-neglect, that you're not looking after yourself properly, that you're not managing the life around you, the domestic issues around you. This was not self-neglect. This was not my mother not caring for herself. This was my mother not being able to care for herself because of a change in her executive function, because of her cognitive decline, because of her dementia. She could read but not understand. And that's what happens with many of our loved ones in those journeys of dementia. They need us to hold their hands. They need us to help them make sense. They need us sometimes to help them make decisions. They don't need us to take over and do everything for them. Again, if at that time when my mother could not understand a sell-by date on a packet of ham, if you met her outside in a social situation or in her house, you would not believe she had dementia. She was still full of life, full of energy, great communicator, a big presence in other people's presence. But her executive functioning was going down. A few weeks and months after that, my mother loved gardening, and she was still buying plants from the garden centre and digging a garden and putting the plants out. And I stood there one day with her, again holding her hand, and she pointed out some plants to me, and she knew that these plants weren't well. They were being eaten by greenfly. They were newish plants, and the greenfly were thinking, yabba dabba doo, here's a tasty meal. And Mum pointed them out to me and she said, I don't know what's going on. And you could see the greenfly eating the small, new, growing leaves. What was really sad was that less than 2 meters away, about 1 meter away, in the greenhouse, was the insect repellent and the bug spray from last year, visible to be seen through the glass. She couldn't connect that it was greenfly that was eating her plants and that the insect repellent was just there. And all of her life as a gardener, she'd known how to protect plants from insects, but now she couldn't put that together. So some advice. If you've got people who you care for your loved ones, or people that you work with who've got dementia, whose executive function is starting to fail, don't take over. They still have the right to make decisions that they can make. Rather, hold their hands, help them, be there. It's not easy. I used to take my son, who at this time was about 17, and towards the end of her life, to visit my mum. I was visiting 4 or 5 times a week, sometimes almost daily. And I took my son along this particular day to meet his grandma. And on the way back, I said to my son, I wanted to apologise for the fact that as a dad, I was spending so much time with grandma that I didn't have a lot of time, spare time, to be with him. And as we were driving along, I said to my son, I'm really sorry that I'm having to spend so much time with grandma at the moment. And he said something to me very quickly, without batting an eyelid again, that was very profound and very helpful to me. He turned around and he said this. He said, Dad, you wouldn't be a very good professor of social work if you couldn't care for your own mum. Indeed, you'd be a fraud. And he was so wise and so kind. because he enabled me to free myself of my own guilt, to spend a bit more time with my mother in the last few weeks and months of her life. It's hard. It's often extremely painful seeing your loved ones like this, seeing people that you've admired, that you've loved, that you've looked up to, struggle with very, very simple tasks of daily living. But as carers and as professionals, what a joy, what a privilege. As carers and professionals, look out for unusual signs and changes in behaviour. Listen and try and understand what's really going on. Often people are embarrassed, afraid, or too proud to directly ask for help. So look out for cues where people are seeking support and help, just like my mum was. Do work together with others to produce a care plan. But I also want to remind us all, we need to care for ourselves as well. It is painful, it is difficult, and therefore make sure you care for yourself. Make sure you're not overburdened and overloaded. Find space and time to look after yourself, plus the loved one you're trying to care for. And finally, my final thoughts would be this. We live in a world where there's often great pain and great tragedy. But one of the wonderful things as human beings is kindness. And simple acts of kindness have profound impacts on people. Today, think about your own loved ones. Think about the people around you, your neighbours, people that you work with in health and social care. The smallest acts of kindness will have a profound impact on those people. So when you're facing people who are struggling with their executive function, who are often acting in ways that don't make sense, just be kind. Just hold somebody's hand and be grateful that you can be a great relative, a great son, daughter, or a carer. Thank you.
So that video there wasn't produced in a sense for the Christian context. It's used, as I said, for healthcare and social care professionals up and down the country. But I think it's also just as relevant for us in churches. And it, in a sense, was me trying to express something of my faith and belief. I've actually recently moved a year ago, and I'm now living about 800 yards away from that village high street that I talked about in that video, where my mother held my hand. And my mother's buried about 2 miles away in that direction. And in 2015, at a funeral, I pledged and committed myself to do something about the banking system and fraud in this country. And it took 10 years. 10 years of lobbying, working with government to try and persuade all the banks in the country that they needed to treat victims of fraud differently. And you're possibly aware that last year, the banking protocol was announced, which means that if you're defrauded of up to £85,000, the banks are committed to giving you your money back. The system is that your bank gives you half the money and the receiving bank gives you half the money. And the idea of that is that it's to try and persuade banks to stop opening up accounts for criminals and siphoning money out of the country. It was a big achievement and I'm very pleased about it. But there are still pitfalls. And ironically enough, I'm experiencing those pitfalls now with my mother-in-law, my wife's mother. She had £4,500 taken out of her bank account just 2 or 3 months ago in 3 transactions, 2 of them claiming to be for a Thomas Cook holiday and 1 of them being for Nike goods. I immediately reported the transactions, £4,500 in total, to the bank, assuming that she'd get her money back. But unfortunately, the bank contacted my mother-in-law with a text and asked mother-in-law whether these were genuine transactions or not. Please reply Y if yes and N if no. And mother-in-law, who's really generally quite capable and able, was very confused by all of this. And she texted back Y by mistake. So then I got the letter from the bank to say, we've investigated this fraud, and given that you confirmed it was a real transaction, you're not having the money back. And having paid her the money back, they took the money back out of her account. So we still got work to do because of the confusion. So just some advice and thoughts about bank accounts. I took my mother-in-law to this particular bank. It's a National High Street bank, and sat down with a senior member of the bank and looked through my mother's bank account. She still had on her account the ability for unlimited access of her funds for foreign use. She's well in her 80s, will not be travelling abroad anytime soon. So one bit of advice is, do ask people, do they still have their bank accounts accessible for foreign use? Because if a criminal from abroad hacks in, the money's gone, and you can switch it off fairly easily. She also had what I thought was a fairly astronomically high daily amount on her bank account. She had access to thousands of pounds per day could be taken out of her account, when the maximum she'd ever take out would be £100. So practical pastoral advice is, try and make sure that your daily limit on your account is not so high, so that if somebody does fraudulently take money out, you're restricting the amount of money that's coming out. She also had the option ticked, which you will all have unless you default ask for this to be taken off, the ability to pay for premium lines and gambling. There'll be very few people in your pastoral care in your church that will be actively gambling or wanting premium lines to pornography and things like this. But these are the ways in which criminals will withdraw money. So just get them switched off. And what I also did to ensure that she never got a text again saying press Y or press N for no, I defaulted the account so that all details come to me and they no longer have my mother-in-law's phone number, it's my number. And so if the bank wants to ring up to check for a fraud, they're speaking to me rather than confusing an elderly lady into potentially making a mistake that could cost her thousands. They're just some practical tips for you and your families and your loved ones, but also for your church. Many of you will know the late Canon Michael Green, a lovely man, prolific author. Michael's wife, shortly before Michael's death, was defrauded by a criminal pretending to be her bank and cleaned out all of their life savings. Because fortunately I knew Michael, he contacted me and I was able to intervene and try and deal with that situation. But even knowledgeable, thoughtful Christians can be wiped out of their life savings. This is serious and it's happening more and more because criminals are moving into this space. Moving on, one of the ones I'm dealing with at the moment nationally is we think we've got organised criminal gangs working with paid carers. Local authorities putting a paid carer to provide domiciliary support and care into families. And then these people set up private contracts, resign from their local authority, and suddenly become sole beneficiaries of people's wills. You wouldn't believe how many cases at the moment I'm dealing with, and I think we've got organised criminal gangs using modern slavery and slave bondage, bringing international workers in, holding their passports, forcing them into these situations of work, forcing them to become sole beneficiaries of people's wills, and then cleaning out the estate. I'm dealing with multiple police forces with this at the moment. The point of this is I'm trying to remind us all this is a big issue, and we need to think about how we support and help those that we love and care for. Moving on, though, I do want to remind us that the term next of kin does not exist in British law. There is no such thing as a next of kin. Your husband, your wife, your children, your parents have no rights to speak on your behalf as to how you should be cared for if you lost the ability to speak for yourself. If you had a brain injury, if you had a stroke, if you unfortunately had dementia, your loved ones do not have the legal right to advocate on your behalf without a lasting power of attorney, health and welfare. This is why the Mental Capacity Act was written and why lasting powers of attorney, health and welfare exist. Please do advise your loved ones to have a lasting power of attorney, health and welfare. And actually, I mean from the age 18 onwards. Your adult child is still your adult child. And if your adult child, who's now an adult, had a brain injury, a car crash, a stroke, and was lying in intensive care, unable to advocate for themselves, you as the mother or the father would still want to intervene. You'd see yourself as the next of kin, but there's no legal basis for you to intervene in those situations without a lasting power of attorney. Get lasting powers of attorney, health and welfare for all your loved ones. It staggers me that there are twice as many lasting powers of attorney for property and affairs than there are for health and welfare. We seem to be more interested in this society to worry about our money than who will look after us and care for us if we can't advocate for ourselves. I'm more interested in living well and dying well than who's going to spend my money when I'm gone. But as British citizens, I think it's fascinating that we seem to, well, there are twice as many registered lasting powers of attorney for property and affairs than there are for health and welfare. The other text that I've written for Faith in Later Life was an all-party parliamentary report on loneliness. Loneliness is still a massive issue within our society. And I think it's one of the most effective missional opportunities for us in our communities to draw alongside lonely older people who are desperate to have company. Have a look at that text if you were interested in it. We, I think, can do so much, and it's why I want to continually stand by Alex and the team at Faith in Later Life. This, to me, is one of the most important charities working in the Christian faith sector. How we, as society, are going to support and care for lonely older people going forward is an issue that vexes all governments of all political persuasions. Indeed, I think that in the next 10 years or 20 years, the church in Britain will have to stand up, or hopefully will stand up, and start to fill some of the spaces left as the state rolls back from providing the welfare state. And we'll end up back into that period of 1850 to 1920, when it was the church that brought about healthcare, education, care of the elderly, family support. As the welfare state gets under such huge pressure, this is a great opportunity for we, the church, to step back into that situation. And so I ask the question, who will tackle the next big issues in society? Who will tackle the issues around safeguarding modern slavery, the use of puberty blockers, mental capacity and consent, fraud and scams? Well, I want to encourage you all that it's Christians that are at the forefront of making the difference and changing the law and the procedures of government in those spaces. I was in the House of Lords just last Friday, presenting material there following the timing out of the assisted dying bill. And I've worked writing for a number of MPs and House of Lords members in the last 6 to 12 months, writing material on coercive control. We have won the debates in many of these areas. Christians are making a profound difference within our society, even if we don't know about it, even if the church doesn't know about it. Trust me, it's people of faith in those spaces. So some final reflections before hopefully some discussions and some questions. I just want to reflect on the title, Faith in Later Life. What a great title. Age offers experience, and it often offers wisdom and insight. Do we use that wisdom and insight? If we don't use it, could we lose it? Older people are a tremendous resource. They're not just a burden. Retirement for me does not mean an ending and slowing down. It's more an opportunity with endless possibilities. Endless possibilities to do things because I don't require paid work anymore. I am retired. I am a pensioner. Although, trust me, I've got so many jobs at the moment, you wouldn't believe how many jobs I've got. But I can pick and choose what I want to do, and in particular, what I believe God is calling me to do, because I don't have to earn a salary, because I have a pension. And that is really liberating. Really liberating. We need to encourage some of our retiring and recently retired members of our congregations to step up and to experience what God's challenge is for them in their lives, to motivate them to follow that and to be faithful. I think I might have told you this story once before to this organisation, but I want to tell it again. It's about an elderly man called Claude Sefton. He faithfully cared for his wife, who was fairly disabled. She had Parkinson's. But Claude, when I was a teenager, used to meet with me because he used to supply the Daily Bread Scripts Union Bible reading notes to the church and to the youth group. And I used to go every month to collect the next month's Bible reading notes for the youth group. And he'd sit with me and he'd, in today's parlance, coach me and mentor me. And he inspired me as a 14, 15-year-old young Christian to want to give my life to serve the vulnerable and the poor in this society. That was over 50 years ago. He's long since been and gone. But an elderly gentleman who was a full-time carer for his disabled wife, stuck at home, found a way to help me. What are we doing today that we might never see the outcome of? It might be 50 years' time. Claude Sefton did not know that that young boy that he was mentoring would change the British banking system. He did not know that he would be in the team that would ban puberty blockers in this country. He did not know that he'd be leading the work on modern slavery and changing the government's view on that. But he was faithful. He was faithful to mentor a young boy in Manchester. And I'm eternally grateful for people like that. So please, don't give up what you're doing. Keep going. Keep going in the faithful work that you believe God has called you to. And I just want to say thank you. And I'll be praying for you later on when we finish the questions. Thank you for all you're doing in your communities and your churches with the people that you serve. You might never see here on earth the impact of what you've done, but don't ever believe that God's not at work. Our faithful God is doing things that are beyond, absolutely beyond our wildest dreams and imaginations, because he surely is a great God. I hope you found that interesting. I hope you found it inspiring. I love talking to Christians rather than politicians and senior healthcare managers. I'd rather do this actually than spend my time in government, because you are my brothers and sisters. And I want to respect you and value you for that. So thank you. And I'm going to hand over to Alex, who's going to help me with some questions, and we'll go from there.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Keith. Gosh, I mean, who wasn't nearly crying in that video earlier on? I didn't realize we were going to get this emotional this afternoon, but thank you for sharing so honestly and so sensitively. I think somebody put in the chat. It's really helpful. And I think I don't know about everybody else, but I was thinking not only on behalf of older people who I know, whether that's in the church or in my family, but I was also thinking about myself, trying to work out, how I can protect myself from some of these issues in the future. So a really helpful session so far. We've got a couple of questions in the chat. We're going to, please do put some more in, especially as it relates to your church ministry among older people. Keith, before we get into those questions, I've got a question.
Yeah.
One of the things that the cartoon version of Keith said on the flip chart was something along the lines of looking after ourselves. And I was thinking about I suppose, the church context. And so my question is, how can pastoral carers avoid becoming overwhelmed or carrying too much for themselves? Because one of the things about Christians and about loving older people is you can end up just overburdening yourself. And many of our church champions are actually themselves now post-retired, often still in the sandwich generation, like yourself, of children and mothers-in-law and that kind of thing. Can we look after ourselves as we serve the church in this way?
Yeah, thank you, Alex. I mean, stress and burnout in ministry is unfortunately too rife. And we do need to think more about how do we protect ourselves from too much stress and from burnout. If you're interested, that's another text I've written that's on my website. You can read all about advice around stress and burnout. But in a nutshell, Alex, what I'd say is, for me anyway, I need friends. I need people that I can be accountable with. I need people who can challenge me. And I need people who I can just be Keith with. Not the professor, not the government advisor, not the one dealing complex and difficult things, just Keith. So who are your people that you know who let you just be, and I'm just looking at names in front of me. Can I just be Jenny? Can I just be Janet? Can I just be Helen? Can I just be Sandy? People that you just have a cup of tea with and a cup of coffee with, and you go along the journey together. Don't take on more than you can cope with, and learn sometimes you have to say no. I even have to do that sometimes. And for me, I balance up, Alex. I think there are only so many things I can do in any one day or any one week or any one month. So what is it specifically? I question, it's my prayer often with God, of the list of things I could do, what should I do and what must I do? And also, therefore, what may I not do? And that, I think, is really important.
Yeah. That's really helpful. Thank you, Keith. That to take some time to step back and look at what God's calling us to, and think about, yeah, what we should or shouldn't get involved. The other thing I found quite helpful is careful use of language. Sometimes we can say yes to something, and before we know, the other person might think we're doing that every week from now on. And so actually setting some boundaries in from the beginning of, for the next 3 weeks, we're going to do this together, and then we'll review and look at another thing, or things around language. I think is important. Setting expectations. Hopefully you'd agree, Keith. This is your opportunity to say you don't agree. That's fine.
No, I agree.
Okay, wonderful. Right, let me have a look at a couple of questions. I saw one just now about oh yeah, somebody has asked, have you got any tips on dealing with people who are still driving and, in your opinion, should give up their license? This is a very contentious issue, isn't it? Throughout the church, throughout families. None of us want to be told what to do in this. None of us want to lose our freedoms. And yet, none of us want to be a danger on the road either. What's your view on this,
I'm
Keith?
smiling because I've got a semi-funny story, but a serious story to tell about this. In the video, it mentioned that my mother got remarried, and she married my stepfather, Graham, and Graham died the year before my mother died. And they're both buried at the same place, Woodlands Burial Ground up the way. And at his funeral, my mum used to be the captain of Highcliffe Bowls Club. And the then current captain of Highcliffe Bowls Club came up to me during the funeral and said, "Can I have a private word with you about your mum's driving?" And I thought, uh-oh. And I was all ready, because I was realizing that my mum had that sort of early stages of dementia. So I kind of went out quietly to a little sort of quiet private place, ready to be given this information from the captain of the Ladies Bowls Club about my mum's driving. What am I going to do? And I was all ready to talk about my mum's driving with the dementia. And she said, "We're really concerned about your mum's drinking and driving."
Oh,
And I thought, what? My mum, I didn't think, was an alcoholic or anything. But what was happening was, because my mum was suffering with dementia, she didn't realize how much she was drinking, because she wasn't remembering she'd already had a drink earlier on. Does that make sense?
yeah.
And the captain of the Ladies Bowls Club was reporting to me, this is my own mother. She kept Graham's blue badge, disabled driving badge, because he only had one leg. She used to drive down to the bowls club, scream down the road, park into the disabled parking bay, come out the car, half drunk, to the bowls club.
Dear.
And I'm thinking, what am I going to do? Professor of social work's got this mother,
Drink driving.
Absolutely. You don't go up to my mother and you say, "Right, Mum, that's the end of it. Thank you very much." I did have this little conversation with her, though, and she said, "Oh, Keith, I've stopped going to Sainsbury's now, because every time I drive into Sainsbury's, somebody hits the car and damages the car." And then I realised she was driving around Sainsbury's car park, smashing into people. So she only went to the Co-op because it was a smaller car park. I'm thinking, how am I... This is really hard, Janet, isn't it?
Yeah.
But I ended up having to say to her, "Mum, this really has to stop. And your driving's got to stop." Unfortunately, for me, she agreed, and unfortunately for her, not very long later, she actually passed away. But it's really important, because you kill somebody or you knock somebody down and you live with that tragedy forever. It's a really big issue. So tips, there's no simples or ways around it, but you need to deal with it. And I think these days, actually, doctors are now much better at writing to DVLA and saying that people's licenses should be revoked. But boy, you'll still cause trouble, because it's like this right of life, isn't it, to drive regardless.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to bring just a bit of positivity into that as well, just in case that's helpful for people to share with anyone they're having these conversations with. Only that I recall a conversation with Faith in Later Life friend Fiona Castle, who did a talk for us last year, and she was telling us about how she'd given up driving. She'd actually chosen it ahead of anybody telling her to do it. And she was telling me about all the great things that had come out of giving up driving.
Mm.
So she was saying that she now gets to have conversations about Jesus at the bus stop or on the bus. She's talking with anybody who gives her a lift, whether that's family, friends, neighbors, or the church. She's having all these wonderful conversations, whether it's about Jesus or just general lovely conversations. But I was noticing in what she was saying that actually not driving was positively impacting her levels of loneliness, that actually it kind of connected her with more people. So I would throw in with what you were saying, Keith, is,
Mm.
maybe also try and bring out the positive, that this could be a really good thing for your next phase of mission and ministry in the kingdom of
Absolutely.
God, if these are conversations you're having in church. So yeah, really tricky conversation, and definitely best handled with care.
Alex, I'm just conscious of time. I'm just scanning
Yeah.
through some of the questions. Somebody made a comment that they thought that occasionally medical practitioners ignore LPAs or don't honour them.
Okay.
I'll just remind people
Yeah.
that when that happens, that's a criminal offence
Mm.
against the law. And I have to spend my life running around reminding doctors of this. So just keep going. They shouldn't ignore them, but they often do.
Okay.
And then there's a couple of questions here about the assisted dying bill and materials and support for with relation to Christian values. Folks, I have not provided advice in a sense. Well, there were Christian values, but it was not as a Christian. My advice was given as an expert in the law and an expert in terms of welfare. And the arguments around coercive control and the lack of safeguarding, I think, have pretty much won the day. So the arguments about the dying bill were not about morality and Christian values. They were that there were fundamental flaws in the bill. And lots of politicians now recognize that. So I hope that helps a little bit. I just think it's important. I wanted to be a leader who is a Christian, not a Christian leader. Does that make sense? I wanted people to ask me for my expertise, not because I was a Christian, but because they trusted my expertise.
Really good. And just to add to that, I think there's a question about what resources Faith in Later Life have about assisted dying. We've actually chosen not to go down that line. We believe there are other organisations better suited to really look into that thing. So there are other charities who do that, and we can pop a couple of those links in our follow-up email. What we talk about at Faith in Later Life is what the Bible says, that we have value for the whole of our lives. And so that would be our firmest guide on that. We have value for the whole of our lives, and that's the stance we take on that.
And that would also be my view, Alex, as well. And that's why I commend you for it. So thank you.
Thank you, Keith. Emma has asked, well, she's first of all said this has been so inspiring, capital S, capital O. Keith, do you have any guidance for those who are called to advocate for older people? Where do they start? What have you learned on your journey that you wish you'd known when you began?
The advocacy is really, really important. There we go. And interestingly enough, most of the time in my role as chairing safeguarding boards for local authorities with health authorities, it's about saying when things go wrong, and we're doing a safeguarding adult review, it's often because there wasn't appropriate advocacy. There was nobody there to speak up on behalf of people. So if you want to be an advocate, contact local. There will always usually be some sort of advocacy body group around you. Be an advocate out there. Join these advocacy groups as a Christian. See it as part of your mission to be an advocate for vulnerable people in your communities. But do advocate. We do need it.
Wonderful. Thank you, Keith. And Nina asked probably something we could answer together, but you start and I'll finish. What do you recommend to combat loneliness for people who have difficulty in getting out of the house?
Wow. You've got lots of ideas on this, Alex, because that's what faith
Why
in
don't
later
I
life.
start and then you
And
join
so
in with
you come
anything
back
I've
in,
said,
but
right?
for me, build friendships. Build friendships that will last. Spend more time nurturing and building and encouraging relationships now, so that when those times come, you've got things around you. Does that make sense? We as Christians, I think, sometimes are just a bit reluctant to really invest in quality relationships, and they are important. And I think biblically, we see that Jesus had disciples, and disciples had other people around them. They worked in groups and teams. So don't work as an individual, build relationships.
Yeah, it's one of those subjects it's really good to get ahead of if you're not yet in later life. I always say plan now for then. And it's a conversation I often have with pre-retired men. Plan now for your retirement, because often men haven't built those deep friendships outside the workplace. How can we do that? But if you're talking about somebody who's already at home and that ship has sailed, and they are experiencing loneliness now, there's a few things that we would say at Faith in Later Life. And one is to draw on some of the things that the church is already really good at. Obviously, pastoral visiting in your teams of two. You might also invoke some phone buddy systems where you actually connect older people with each other. In fact, the lonely older person who can't get out would really value and benefit from having a purpose. They could be in the midst of that phone buddy system where they're the ones ringing other people to bless them, to share scripture, to pray for people on the phone, and that kind of thing. So there's the issue of actual connection, but there's also the issue of purpose. God has made us to have lifelong purpose in his kingdom. And all of us, I mean, the reason we're on this call is because we're thriving in the purpose and the calling of God. And so we need to help older people who are now based at home to have a home-based mission ministry and facilitate that in whatever way we can. Things like helping them to know what the prayer requests of your churches are, for example, helping just still sharing the church meeting minutes and that kind of thing. Keep them involved in the mission of God in your church. So that would be what I would say about that. I think, well, we've run out of time spectacularly, as usual. And also, I think that has reached the end of our questions, but I hope that you've all found that helpful. Keith, it's been really good to hear you combine sort of your very personal experience with your very professional experience and lots of church things in the midst of that too. So thank you very much. Would you lead us in a short prayer before I share just a couple of notices?
I'll be delighted to, Alex.
Thank you.
And I'm just reflecting on some of the comments there. So, Father God, thank you for this session together. But I'm also conscious of those people who are talking about being recently widowed, maybe lonely. Almighty God, would you reach out and put your loving arms around anybody who's feeling a bit bruised today, a bit lonely? Would they feel your presence evermore? And may we all be people who are prepared to stand up, to be seen and heard, and care for those who are lonely, widowed, marginalised. And may we see you move amongst our communities in a great and powerful way as we seek to serve you. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Keith.